And today's message starts with, as I was saying, because the message today is left over from February. You remember February? Barely. Back in February, we were talking about the topic of being light in a dark world. Then all of a sudden, somebody turned off the lights. It's like we were talking about how rough it was in the world and how things were difficult and how mankind just kept getting further and further away from the truth and everything like that. And then all of a sudden this happened. It got worse. And it just keeps getting worse, doesn't it? It seems like the darkness just keeps coming. So I think more than ever, we have to figure out how we are going to be a light in a dark world. And the person we are looking at is a guy by the name of Elijah. And what we're going to do today is really just kind of go back to the first two lessons that we already did. Let's do a little review, because I'm sure nobody here remembers what we talked about in February. So we're going to do a little pickup of where we're at, and then we'll pick up again where we kind of left off a few months ago. But the idea is that we are supposed to be a light in this world. And we looked at Elijah because Elijah was a prophet to the people of Israel. And Israel was basically tapped by God to be a light in the world. That was their whole purpose. If you look at the history of mankind, where we had the fall, right? And then mankind was told to go out and conquer the world. And they went out, and what did they decide to do? Sin. Sin. Every thought imaginable was against God, was against the truth. And it got so dark that God was sorry that he even made mankind. So while he kept one little strain, one little family coming along that was following him, which came along to a guy by the name of Noah and his family, the rest of the world was lost, wasn't it? And it was only those 8 people that got into that ark and were saved. And then after that, God once again said what? Spread out. Go out. Populate the earth. And what did they decide to do? We're staying here. We're going to build a big old tower to God, and we're going to stay here. We're going to do what we want to do. How stubborn is mankind? Very. And if you ever want to know exactly how stubborn we are in our heart of hearts, just try to argue with a 2-year-old. That's your natural state, people. That is where you're at. And we are a stubborn, stubborn people. And we said no, so God said you're going. And how did he do it? I'm giving you different languages. And I'm going to make you break up by languages and go off and populate the earth. And as they went out by their languages, they created nations. But unfortunately, what did those nations decide to do? We will worship idols. We will worship ourselves. We will worship nature. We will worship anything except who? The one true God. So finally God looked down on the earth and he said, okay, I'm going to pick one guy by the name of Abraham, and his wife Sarai or Sarah. I'm going to pick him and I'm going to make a nation of him. And as he says in Genesis, he says, of you the whole world will be blessed. You are going to be the nation. You're going to be the light, for good or for bad. When God punished them, that was a light. That was a warning to the world. When God blessed them, it was a light to the world of when we follow him, how much he will bless. And they were to be, and are still today, to be a light to the world, right? But today, who else is supposed to be a light? Raise your hand. We are the light of the world, right? All those who put their faith in Jesus Christ. The church is to be the light of the world. But unfortunately, the world keeps getting what? Darker. Now, I have said this before. I'm going to say it again for all those at home, those who haven't heard it yet. I want to remind ourselves, how do you make something darker? Is it by turning on more darkness? Is that how you do it? Is that how you turn on darkness? Is you turn on more darkness? How do you make something darker? You remove the light, right? You take away the light. So if we look at this country, if we look at our society, if we look at this world, we as the light, if it's getting darker out there, let me ask you one good question. Whose fault is it? The light. We're not getting the light out. And that's what happened with Israel. Israel was the light to the world, yet they decided to slide into darkness. During the time of the judges, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, didn't it? To a time when we almost had the entire tribe of Benjamin wiped out because of their sin. We had the Judge Samson, who was far less than he was supposed to be. And we had the judges going along and kept getting worse and worse and worse until finally the people got a great idea. Hey, you know what would really help us? A king. If we had a king just like everybody else, then we will be the light we're supposed to be. By the way, does it ever work to say, if we do it like the world, we'll be light? No. And did it help? Well, they ended up with King Saul, a problem, right? But then they ended up with King David. And King David was a man after God's own heart. And God blessed the nation under David. But was David perfect? Also, because of the sin of David, God said, my name is mocked in this world. So there's a problem there still, isn't it? Mankind is the problem. And when we're not the light we're supposed to be, it gets darker. And then after David, we have Israel slide into darkness. In fact, let's take up our Bibles and look at 1 Kings chapter 11. Let's start there. 1 Kings chapter 11. What caused this slide into darkness for the nation of Israel after the reign of David? And it comes down to his son. You say, well, his son, Solomon. Solomon was a good king. You remember King Solomon, right? Even as a young man, as he took the reins, God said, I'll give you anything you want. And what did he choose? Wisdom. Wisdom to run this country. Wisdom to judge these people. Wisdom to lead them. How many say that's a good start? But often good starts can lead to bad finishes, can't it? And Solomon had a problem that led him into darkness. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1. But, that's never a good way to start anything. Basically, you can say King Solomon did lots and lots of great things, but King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh of Egypt, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. And that's just a short list. Of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, you shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you. For surely they will turn away your heart from after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in, and it should have little quotation marks around it, love. He loved every one of them with all of his heart. How many are we talking about? Lots of them. Verse 3. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Basically, because he had these wives and because they were of other nations that worshipped other gods, and they themselves worshipped other gods, they did not turn to the one true God. Now, I want you to note something. Did Solomon ever turn from God? No, he worshipped God, sacrificed to God, prayed to God, loved God, but what's the problem? He also allowed these others into his life. And when the people of God, even though we may come to church, even though we may sing praises, even though we are saved, even though we read our Bible, if we allow the other things of this world also to turn our heart to them, are we going to shut off the light a little bit? And how often does that happen? There's so many other things in our life pulling for our attention. And when we start to love them, we have a problem. And there's a long list of things we could list there, but we have a problem. That's why God said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with what? All your heart, all your soul, all your might, all your mind, right? You got to give him all, because once you start loving these other things, and as he turned to his wives and said, I love you, slowly but surely they started turning his attention. In fact, they would come to him and say, oh, you know what? Yeah, you've got your God, but I've got mine. Can you just build me a little high place up in the mountains there? Just a little grove or something where I can go worship them? And because he loved them, he'd say what? Okay. Especially as he was getting older, getting on, kind of getting comfortable with things. And then they would say, well, you know, it's so lonely going up there all by myself. Can you just come along with me? Can you just kind of just go up there with me as I go? And he eventually would say what? Sure. And then it was, well, you know, I go and I sacrifice all by myself. Can you just come with me into the grove? Can you just kind of come along? And is there a problem? His light started to what? Dim. And it had its consequences. Verse 4. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. And his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. It was not pure with God. It was not solely fixed on the one true God. It's not like he didn't love God anymore. It just wasn't pure towards God. And is that a problem? Yes. Verse 5, for Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as David his father. Now, was David his father perfect? Absolutely not. Did he ever commit sin? Absolutely he did. Did he rebel against God at times? Yes. But where was his heart? Did he feel sorry for what he'd done? Did he turn to God and seek repentance, seek restoration? Was that his greatest desire, was to have a relationship with God? Yes, and that's the difference. As Solomon started getting into these sins, he felt none of that. He didn't care that this was interfering with his relationship with God. He just started moving along and allowing it to happen. And frankly, these groves that he created, these little areas of worship he created, that started Israel on this long slide to absolute darkness. They could not get rid of them. Whenever they would take them down, people would come and put them right back up. And people just kept coming and coming. And some of these gods, Shamash, come on. Milcom, come on. Sacrificing children to these gods is what people of Israel went on and started doing. Is this a problem? The light dims when our heart turns to other things. So do we have to be careful? Does the church have to be careful? Do we as individuals have to be careful? If we want the light on the United States, the church must turn and give its heart 100% to who? To God. Not to all these other things. In fact, how bad did it get? Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 12. We're going to look at verse 25. Because of this sin, God told Solomon, I'm breaking up the country. When you die, and I'm not going to take it away during your time because of my promise to David, but after you die, your son, Rehoboam, is going to lose half the country. 10 tribes are going to go after a guy by the name of Jeroboam, and Rehoboam's only going to keep Judah and Benjamin. I'm breaking up the band. We're going to break it up so that, because of all of this sin. So what did Jeroboam, now the king of the 10 tribes of Israel, how did he do? Let's take a look. Chapter 12, verse 25. Then Jeroboam, again, he's not related to Solomon. He's a whole different line. He is the king of the 10 tribes of the north, 10 tribes of Israel. He built Shechem and Mount Ephraim and dwelt therein. So that was his capital. And went out from thence and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his, where? Heart. Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David, if the people go up to do service in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, their king, Rehoboam, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah. And they shall kill me and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah. So let me ask you something. Where is Jeroboam's heart? What is his number one concern? Worship of God? Self-preservation. My power. My authority. Who gave him that authority, by the way? God did. God came to him and said, I'm giving you this. And yet he says, I got to figure out how to keep the people from going down to Judah to worship God in the rightful temple. So what kind of idea did he come up with? Verse 28. Wherefore the king took counsel. By the way, do you think God was part of that counsel? No. By the way, if you ever take counsel, make God your counsel, okay? Go talk to him. Talk to people of God, right? Don't just talk to anybody, because he just talked to anybody. And what did they come up with? Wherefore they took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, It is too much for you, the people, to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. So he took counsel, and his bright idea was, I'm going to make some golden calves. Now, it's just so stupid. How dumb are we? I mean, if anything, I would even excuse it if like 2 gold penguins. I mean, that would be better. Does he remember the stories of the golden calves? Does he understand the reference here? Does he understand what they mean? And what he decided to do is put one at the top of the country and one at the bottom of the country, and everybody would go to those. And how long did it take for Israel to finally get rid of those stupid golden calves? It took centuries. It's ridiculous. And slowly but surely we have this march from just having some groves to now having idols to now the king saying everybody should go and worship these gods and not go worship the one true God. How big a problem is this? A big one. So Jeroboam's off the scene. God comes and judges him and his sons and takes them away, and along comes a guy by the name of Baasha. Let's see how he does. 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 34. So God tries another group of people. Says, hey, let's see how you guys do. Chapter 15, verse 34. 1 Kings 15:34, and Baasha did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin wherewith he made Israel to sin. So, did Baasha fix the problem? No, they just kept sliding more and more into what? Into sin. In fact, look at chapter 16, verse 1. Then the word of the Lord came to Jehu, the son of Hanani, against Baasha, saying, For as much as I exalted thee, Baasha, out of the dust, and made thee prince over my people Israel, and thou hast walked in the way of Jeroboam, and hast made my people Israel to sin, to provoke me to anger with their sins, behold, I will take away the posterity of Baasha and the posterity of the house, and will make thy house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So, you're gone. I'm taking you out. And is it going to get better? No. They ended up having civil war. In fact, let's look at chapter 16, verse 8. First Kings chapter 16, verse 8. Talk about a slide into oblivion. Here it starts, for real. In the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Elah, the son of Baasha, to reign over Israel in Tirzah 2 years. Not a long reign, is it? Why? Because of judgment. And his servant Zimri, captain of half his chariots, conspired against him, and he was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, steward of his house in Tirzah. So this is a great guy. He's off getting himself drunk, and Zimri went in and killed him. In the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. So Zimri just comes in and kills him when he's drunk. How long does Zimri get to hang out? 7 days. And it came to pass when he began to reign, as soon as he sat on his throne, that he slew all the house of Baasha. He left him not one that pisseth against the wall. Nice. Neither of his kinsfolk nor of his friends. Thus did Zimri destroy all the house of Baasha, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake against Baasha by Jehu the prophet, for all the sins that he had committed. Jump down to verse 15. And the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, did Zimri reign 7 days. And 7 days there was a war, and Omri comes in. And everybody know Omri? Let's take a quick look at Omri. Look at verse 28. So Omri, let's back up a little bit. Verse 21. Then were the people of Israel divided into 2 parts. Half the people followed Tibri, the son of Gil. So after Zimri died, was killed in battle, they split into 2 groups. One followed Tibni, and the other one came and followed Omri. Verse 22. But the people that followed Omri prevailed against the people that followed Tibni. So Tibni died, and Omri reigned. In the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri began to reign over Israel 12 years. 6 years reigned he in Tirzah. And he bought the hill Samaria. You ever want to know why the people of Samaria, the people who were north of Judah, were known as Samaritans? This is why. He moved the capital to Samaria. So the capital of the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, was Samaria. So they became known as Samaritans. So Samaria of Shemer for 2 talents of silver, and built on the hill, and called the name of the city which he built after the name of Shemer, owner of the hill, Samaria. But Omri wrought evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did worse than all that were before him. Are we getting better or worse? God keeps taking them out. God keeps bringing another one in. Is anybody learning anything? And Omri did so far worse than anybody before him. But can you still do worse? Just because you've done worse than everybody before, does that mean you can't get worse? Oh, it got worse. Jump down to verse 28. So Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab, his son, reigned in his stead. Everybody remember Ahab? Everybody remember Ahab's wife? Jezebel. This is how it keeps getting worse. The light keeps getting what? Dimmer and dimmer and dimmer until it's just about out. Why? Because their heart was not towards God, but towards others. Their heart was turned to other gods. They slowly but surely turned away from God and were completely then devoted to those other idols and those other things they found so important. And you may sit here today and say, well, that's okay, because in America, we don't have idols. We don't have things like that. We don't turn our hearts to everything. No, let's face it. If you think about the church in America, has its heart been turned to other things? And we think they are so important. But compared to the gospel of Jesus Christ, compared to who God is, compared to our love and relationship with Him, these things are nothing, yet we keep putting our attention on them. And the more we put our attention on those things, what happens to our light? It keeps dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And then we sit there and say, what? I can't believe how dark it is. If you go around the house and keep turning off the lights, can you complain about it being dark? But that's what we're doing. We need to be a light in a dark world. Not becoming dimmer and dimmer like they did. In fact, it got so bad. Look at Ahab. 29. And in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah. Now I want to point that out just for a second. All this is happening while Judah has had how many kings? One. Who loved the Lord. Whose heart was not turned from the Lord. And he's reigning, and they're prosperous, and they're blessed. Meanwhile, Israel is just off a cliff. And now come to Ahab. Ahab the son of Omri to reign over Israel, and Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. How long can a president, what's the maximum amount a president of the United States can be president? How much damage can they do in 8 years? How much damage can you do in 22 years? And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. He looked at what his dad did and said, I can do worse than that. In fact, I can get some help. I'll get Jezebel. She'll help me do worse than my father did. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethabel, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. And he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. These are no longer idols that are way out there. These are no longer groves up in the hills. He made an altar and a temple for Baal in the middle of the capital city. And said what? Worship him. And Ahab made a grove. And Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. Problem? It's dark. But is there still hope? We've been talking about that on Sunday night. Is there always hope? There's always hope because there's always God, right? And as long as there are people of God willing to stand up and turn on a light, it can make a difference, can it? How many does it take? How many people does it take to make a difference in a dark world? We used to always go down to a place called Crystal Cave. It's in the the Sequoia National Park. Every year we'd go there. We go down the Crystal Cave, and you go down in the cave, and you get down there, and then they'll turn off the lights. How dark is it in a cave when you turn off the lights? Yeah, can't see the fan in front of your face. You can see absolutely nothing. What does it take to bring light enough in there for you to see? One match, lit by one person. So if we sit here and say there's nothing we can do, it's just going to keep getting darker and darker and darker. No, that's not true. All it takes is the people of God to stand up and say, we're turning on a light. And even if it's one person, even if it's a small little church, even if it's a small community of people, to stand up and say, I'm not going to have my heart turned away to other things. I'm not going to focus on those unimportant things. I am going to focus on sending the light. I'm going to focus on sending the truth. I'm going to focus on sending the gospel out and telling people the truth of God. I'm not going to worry about all those other things. I'm going to be a light. And in Israel, there was such a man. Chapter 17, verse 1. And Elijah, the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said unto Ahab, as the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. I find this to be an amazing introduction. Because you would think, in order to defeat this great darkness that had come over Israel, it must take a great man of God, one that is perfect before God, one that is strong before God, one that has been called before he was even born to come up and be that light. But what do we learn about him? He's just a dude. In fact, in James, it reminds us that Elijah is just like us. A sinner, just like us. A man given to temptations, just like us. The only difference is he stood up and said, I'm going to be a light. We know nothing else. He's not a son of a minister. He's not a son of a priest. We know nothing about him other than he stood up and said, I'm going to be a light. Can we be that light? As we're reminded in 1 Corinthians, God chose not the wisest, but in fact the fools of the world. Not the strong, not the powerful, not the influential, but he chose us. So we can put at silence all those who put their trust in the things of the world, right? And he can use us if we will just stand up and speak the simple truth. And that's what Elijah did. What you're doing is wrong, Ahab, so I prayed to the one and only true God. I prayed that it would not rain until I say so. And what do you think Ahab's response would be immediately? Right. We'll just go pray to Baal. Baal is the god of rain. He's the god of the harvest. We can take care of that, no problem. You crazy Elijah. But what do you think after a month, 2 months, 2 years? What do you think then? And did God use Elijah in mighty ways? In fact, let's take a look at a few things that happened. Did it not rain? It absolutely did not. Verse 6 and 7. Chapter 17, verse 6 and 7. In fact, it did not rain, so he sent Elijah to where he could get some water. And while he was there, chapter 17, verse 6 and 7, the ravens brought Elijah bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook, and it came to pass after a while that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. It did not rain. And is that a big deal in an agrarian society? Huge deal. What's dying? Everything's dying. The crops are dying. The cattle is dying. Everything's dying. People are dying. But is God taking care of his man? Having ravens bring food. Baltimore Ravens, coming and bringing him food in the morning and the evening, making sure he's taking care of him. And when the brooks dried up, oh no, God didn't see that coming. Now he's going to die. No, he had a plan. In fact, what was his plan? Let's jump to verse 9. he tells them, "Get thee to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee." So go, not in Israel, to Zidon. By the way, who's from Zidon that we know of already in the story? Jezebel. In fact, she's the daughter of the king of the Zidonians, and they are great Ashtaroth and Baal worshippers up there. But God says, go to that widow, she will sustain you. And when he gets there, what's the widow woman doing? She's out collecting a few sticks so she can make the last little bit of food so she and her son could eat it, lay down, and die. And Elijah says what? You make that bread for me, and God will take care of us. Was she faithful? Did she trust God? Made that food for him, and that oil and that meal did not run out the entire time. They always had water, they always had oil, they always had food every single day as God took care of them. Let me ask you something. If we are willing to stand up and be a light, will God watch out for us? Will God give us the strength we need? Will he take care of us? We need not worry. That's something that holds us back. If I stand up and say something, then they'll all be against me. If I stand up and say something, then I won't have any friends. If I stand up and say something, my family will abandon me, and these will abandon me, and those will abandon me. What does God say? I will take care of you, and I will use any resource. Just trust me. Stand up for the truth. By the way, make sure you stand up for the truth, not a truth. not just something you made up. Not the things of this world. Don't worry about those things. But the truth of the Word of God. Stand up for the gospel. Stand up for who Jesus is, for who God is, and trust him. Right? Will he take care of us? But then we saw, do things sometimes go wrong still? Yeah. And not from the enemy. Something called life. How many agree life is hard? And I've said this before. I mean, the reality of the matter is things go wrong in our life, I believe, because of three different reasons. One, sometimes because we've done something wrong. Okay? It's just consequences of things we've done. Sometimes because other people do things wrong. We live in a sinful world, right? And the third reason is probably the hardest one to swallow. It's something called life. If you were to catch coronavirus, is it because you did something wrong, somebody else did something wrong, or is it just life? Probably just life. We live in a fallen world, don't we? We're all dying. It's just the reality of the matter, right? And that's what this is. This wasn't judgment. This wasn't something that the other side did. This isn't Ahab and Jezebel coming and bringing this tragedy into this life. It was just life. In chapter 17, verse 17. Sometimes things just go, quote unquote, wrong. And this is what happened. And it came to pass after these things that the son of the woman, this widow woman who had been sustained through all of this, who initially was just going to lay down with her son and die, she is so happy until the mistress of the house fell sick. So the child fell sick. And his sickness was so sore that there was no breath left in him. He got sick and he what? Died. What do you do then? I stood up for you, Lord. I trusted you, Lord. I'm a light. Is it easy when things go wrong to just dim our light a little bit? And say, what's the point? What's the point of being a light if things are still going to go wrong? What's the point of going out and telling people if God's not going to protect me from everything going bad? Why should I even do this? And that's kind of what her response was. Look at verse 18. And the widow said unto Elijah, What have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? And art thou come unto me to call my sin to remembrance and to slay my son? Are you here just to judge me? Are you here? Is God really just going to judge us? What's the point of doing right if God's just going to judge us for all we've done wrong? That's a good question. But is that what it was? How do we respond to things going wrong? Do we blame God? Do we quit? Do we just go into depression? Do we say it's unfair? One of my worst phrases in human language. It's unfair. What do? You know what Elijah decided to do? Pray. Pray and turn up the light. That's what you do. In fact, what did he do? Verse 19. And Elijah said to her, "Give me thy son." And he took him out of her bosom and carried him up into a loft where he abode and laid him upon his own bed. And he cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow which whom I sojourned by slaying her son? Now I want you to note there, is he doing a little blame game here too? Is he angry? Is he a little frustrated? What's the difference between the widow woman and Elijah then? He prayed. You may feel a little depressed. You may feel a little hurt. You may feel like it's unfair. You may feel like this isn't right. You may feel like quitting, but I encourage you to do what Elijah did and talk to God about it. Let him know how you're feeling. He knows how you're feeling. But take it to him. Don't just bottle it up inside. Go and talk to him and say, hey, what's going on here? Why has this happened? And then can we get an answer? He did. Verse 21. And Elijah stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come unto him again. He didn't just leave it at, why have you done this? This isn't fair. But he went on to what? Lord, please help. Now what could God have done at that point? Could he have said no? Yeah. But this time he said what? He said yes. And bet if Elijah the answer would have been no, could he have still been happy? Could he still move forward? Because he took it to God. And we need to do the same thing. Take it to him. But in this case, verse 22, and the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came unto him again and revived him. And Elijah took the child and brought him down out of the chamber into the house and delivered him into his mother. And Elijah said, See, thy son lives. And the woman said to Elijah, Now by this I know that thou art a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in thy mouth is truth. How big a light was he then to that widow woman? Because he simply took to the Lord in prayer. This is something we need to do. You want to be a light in the world? Where should your heart be? Fixed on God. Fixed on the things of God. Fixed on the truth. And if you want to turn up the light out there, well, that's where we've got to be. We've got to have that heart right with God and not drawn away to all these things of the world. And then we've got to go do what? Actually shine the light, right? We've got to get out there and turn on the light. Don't sit there and just complain about the darkness. How many times does that solve the problem? Try it at home tonight. As you get home from church tonight, just go into the dark room and complain about how dark it is and see if that turns on the light. It does not. Judge it. How dare you be dark? Does that make it light? No. The church, the people of God, need to turn on the light. And we need to get the light out there so the world may see. Right? That's how you change things. And that's how Elijah. And don't just say, I'm just a person. What can I do? What did Elijah, just one simple guy, what did he do? He brought light, didn't he? And he trusted the Lord. And when things went wrong, who did he trust? He trusted the Lord. He prayed to God, communicate with God, be close to God, and he will get us through. And from then, we're going to see next week how he's going to have a tremendous victory. And boy, isn't it nice. How many like to have victories? I love victories. I love just getting home after everything's went so well, and so many people's lives have changed, and it's wonderful. How many then have those crashing defeats that come right after it? Ever had those? Seems like they get a little deeper. We're going to see how he handles that next week, because we're going to have those too. If we stand up to be light, the enemy will still stand up too. And sometimes we'll have victories, and sometimes things will get rough, won't they? Who do we need to trust in the entire time? Trust in God and keep shining the light. And will God make a difference? Absolutely. Let's pray.